Today we are working on part 2 of our sermon series, and it is a season of change. And last week we talked about change is necessary and how it's really difficult sometimes for us to go through changes, especially when we don't, want it or ask for it. But today we're going to be talking about change takes time. And I don't know about you, but fall is beautiful, and I love fall. But one of the hardest seasons of my life is winter. I despise winter more than anything in the world. The snow's beautiful. It's great. It's wonderful. But I do not like to be cold. I do not like the cold weather. I don't care how cold, how many layers of clothes you put on, it's still cold outside. When it's cold, they say there's a different level of cold. When it's cold, it's cold. I don't care. So winter is a season of my life that is really, really difficult. And I'm usually sitting all winter counting down, waiting for spring, waiting for that first sign of those little flowers popping through, knowing that spring is coming. I long for that change. I long for that season to change from winter to summer. I always say my birthday is in mid-February, and if we can get to mid-February to my birthday, that season is close to being over. I don't know, there's something between New Year's Day and my birthday, close to Valentine's Day. That is the hardest 6 or 7 weeks of the year for people like me who despise winter. And so I long for that change. I want it so badly to be able to come. But here's the thing. Sometimes we want change to happen. Sometimes we want changes to occur in our life. And it's like for me that dreaded winter day where it feels like the change is never going to come. For instance, some of you in this room or some of you on the live stream may be longing for that day when you were able to retire. That you just cannot wait till that day comes. And I'm going to tell you what, when we start, hoping for that and longing for that, sometimes the more we long for that change to happen, the longer it seems to be. Or maybe that change is, maybe you're dealing with weight loss and you want to lose weight, or maybe you want to change jobs, or maybe you want to be at a different level in your life. Change takes time. I was thinking about this week in preparation about sometimes we want to be like Clark Kent in Superman when we want change. We want to walk by a telephone booth. We want to walk into that telephone booth, and we want to come out, and everything is changed, right? We want change to happen almost overnight or immediately. That's me. If you're a patient person, would you please call me this week and set up a counseling appointment with me? Because sometimes I'm impatient. I want things to happen, and I want them to happen now. I want that change. I love winter right up until December the 26th. It can be a white Christmas, and that's wonderful and it's beautiful. But after that, I'm done. I'm ready for the next season. And isn't that true in our lives? We want things and we like seasons, but we're always wanting that next season. And so often in our life, it's challenging to wait. To me, wait is a 4-letter word. My mom used to warn me about, saying 4-letter words. To me, wait and cold are 4-letter words. And waiting in the cold, that's really difficult for me. But sometimes we want a season of change in our life. And what I'm learning in my life is the change that I want to happen takes much longer than what I want it to take. Anybody else ever experienced that in your life? You want this change. You want something to change in your life, and it seems to take way longer than what you want it to take. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is why, what we can learn while we're waiting for that change, for that season of change. What is it that God wants us to be doing? How is it that we are supposed to be responding, waiting on God? Because here's the thing, I've said this several times, standing here in this pulpit. To rush God is to find fault with God. I'm going to say it one more time. To rush God is to find fault with God. Some days we want to have a consult with God and say, God, hurry up! I'm tired of this season that I'm in my life. I am ready to move on. I am ready for something else. I think about being a teenager. We got some teenagers sitting here on the front row. And, I was ready. I'll never forget. I was ready for that season when I could finally drive, when I was 16 years old. I was tired of having to ask my mom to take me somewhere. I couldn't wait. It was like, but it was like forever. Folks, I used to go out and sit in the car and pretend I was driving because I couldn't wait for that season to happen. So many times we long for that. And then when you're in high school, you couldn't wait for college. You couldn't wait till you were 18 and got out of that season of your life. And then when you're in college, you can't wait for college to be over and you can be an adult and live your life and buy a house and do all that stuff. We're always in a constant season of change. We are always in a season of change, and sometimes we long for things to change, and we want them to change quickly. I'll never forget when I was in college. I just wanted to be done with college. I didn't like school. I wasn't good at school. And I can remember sitting there thinking, why am I taking these classes? Why can't you just give me my teaching degree and let me be out the door? I'm done. But when I when I went to student teach, one of the things that I said to myself early on in my student teaching was, I was glad for those classes. When they finally put me in front of kids, when they finally got to the point where it was like, okay, Chad, here's your classroom. You got fourth grade. You got 20-some fourth graders. And I'm like, what do I do now? Pull my hair out? But what happened was all of that preparation leading up to that, all that training, everything that I learned while I waited for that started kicking in. All of that stuff started kicking in, and then all of a sudden it was like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I was taught this. So sometimes in the waiting, while we're waiting, we are being developed. What I didn't realize in college was that I was being developed to be a teacher. They were teaching me all of these things that I thought were worthless while I waited for that teaching degree, while I waited for that day where I could finally graduate. It was preparation. So while we're waiting, what we need to realize is while we're waiting for a season of change, some preparation needs to happen. I'll never forget somebody giving me some dating advice one time. And I think this is appropriate for where we are today while we're waiting. Sometimes we're longing and we're waiting for something, and somebody gave a piece of dating advice that I thought was really, really good. You might be ready for them, but they might not be ready for you. You might be ready for them. You might be ready for that piece, but there's something else that needs to happen in that process. And so my point is, God will never give us the season of change we want until everything comes together. We sometimes don't care if everything else comes together because we just want it, we want it for us. We want it and we want it now. Okay, I'm done with all those analogies. All of that to say, God is preparing us in the waiting time. The thing that I've learned while I'm waiting for that season of change to happen, God is preparing in me something that I will be prepared for when He finally brings about that change. All these things need to come together. God doesn't just answer our prayer in a vacuum and go, okay, I'm only going to worry about what Chad's life and fitting all the pieces together. No, He's got to make sure everything is coming together in His plan, and then He'll answer things in accordance so it fits together perfectly. He's preparing us for what He has prepared for us in those seasons of change. All of that to say, I want to share with you, we've been studying the book of Esther, and I have never really studied the book of Esther in the Old Testament up until this sermon series. It was one of the things on my list. I keep a list of things that I like to preach about, and Esther was on that list. And I had just done some studies recently in my devotion time on the book of Esther. And so I've really began studying the book of Esther. And it's been really fascinating to me. Again, I'm going to recap. Last week, I didn't have a lot of points to the sermon last week, just because I felt like I needed to lay the groundwork. Esther in the Bible was a young lady who, as I said last week, she had a lot of changes happening in her life that she didn't actually ask for. And I think a lot of times we go through changes in life that we don't necessarily ask for. She was in exile in Persia, in a different country. She didn't ask for that. Her mom and dad, passed. She didn't ask for that. She was raised by a cousin, Mordecai. She didn't ask for that. Now she's, going to be in training for a year, and that's what we're going to talk about today, in preparation to be possibly selected as the next queen. So there was a lot of change that she didn't ask for. Mordecai was the one who said, okay, Esther, you're gonna be in the harem. You're beautiful, and I think, you could possibly become the next queen. And so I think you need to do this. So she didn't even have a lot of, say in that change. So now she goes to this harem, this group of ladies who were going to be in a preparation time to be presented to the king so the king could select the next queen for himself. And so in the story we're going to talk about today, it was a year-long process. And as I studied a lot about this story this week, the women would have to spend the first 6 months basically in quarantine. And that day and age, we all understand quarantine. We were all quarantined probably with COVID. There was a lot of diseases and things. And so the king wanted to make sure that whoever he selected as his next wife, the next queen, would in fact be healthy. There were nothing that would be passed on to him. So they would have to go through a lot of different things in that process. That was number one. The number two thing that she would have had to go through was, because of that day and age, a lot of you ladies understand moisturizer. They lived in a very dry atmosphere, and the skin of a woman, even a beautiful woman, would be cracked and very dry and wrinkly, whatever, from the environment. And so what they did in that 6-month period was they would deal moisturizers and creams and all kinds of things to really make sure that the ladies they put in front of the king to be able to select the next queen, that they were not only beautiful, but they were healthy, and they were also, their skin was beautiful and everything like that. So I want to take you, I'm going to overlap a little bit from last week because I really think this is important for us as we talk about a season, the season of change takes time. I'm going to be looking at Esther chapter 2. We're going to be reading starting in verse 12. And I do remind you that if you know some of these words and some of these names, please let me know afterwards. Hey, Chad, you butchered that. And I'll say, you're right. But I'm going to hopefully get through this. So here, Esther now is in this training course to possibly become the queen. And so we find here in verse 12, before a young woman's turn came to go into the king Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatment prescribed for women. 6 months with myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics. Okay, so now what I want to share with you today is that she had to spend 6 months in beauty treatments. She had to spend 6 months doing myrrh and all these different perfumes and cosmetics. So she had to spend a year waiting for the possibility. She had no idea, I don't believe, unless her cousin Mordecai had some insight from God. She had no idea that she was going to be selected. So she had to spend a year waiting. I don't mind telling you, I don't want to spend an hour waiting, let alone a year. But what we see here is that she had to wait a year. Folks, you might have been waiting for your season of change for a year or even longer. All throughout Scripture, many of the people in the Bible waited a long time for their season of change. I think about Mary. We're getting ready to celebrate, it's amazing, we're getting ready to celebrate Christmas in we're close to just about a month. We're going to be starting our Advent series. Mary had to wait 9 months for Jesus to be born. She had a lot of waiting. There's a lot of preparation. Here in this story, Esther has to wait a year. And I'm going to tell you what, when you are waiting, a year is a long time. When you're not really waiting for something, a year just passes, just like that. It seems like, the older I get, the quicker my birthdays come. I think they shorten the year, especially when you're celebrating birthdays, I can't imagine that I'm just a little bit south of 50 years old. It just blows me away. I feel like I'm still a teenager. I feel like I just graduated high school yesterday. But, now all of a sudden, I'm just a little bit south of 50. So my point is, if we're waiting, it seems like forever. But if we're not waiting, those years just seem to click off quickly. And so I'm sure for Esther, in this year-long, can you imagine the year-long training and treatment that she had to have? And I'm sure, folks, this was not easy training. This was not something that, she was being pampered or whatever. I'm sure it was difficult. And I'm going to share with you, sometimes as we're waiting for our season of change, that thing to happen, there's a lot of preparation that happens, and it's not usually easy. Some of the greatest training I've had in my life wasn't easy. I said earlier I graduated college with a teaching degree, but I also graduated seminary. It took me 10 years to get a 3.5-year degree. I'm really one of those good ones, but I was working full time. But my seminary degree, I look back, and I'm going to tell you what, I had some really, really difficult classes in seminary. Anybody know Greek? Anybody know Greek? The language Greek? I had to take a Greek class because the New Testament is written in Greek, and I'm going to tell you what, it was all Greek to me. From the time it started, it was all Greek to me. But what I will tell you is what I learned in that time, it was very, very difficult. That was a horribly difficult class. But what I learned was how to better read God's Word. I got a lot of tools and things that helped me. So there's, in that preparation time, it may be difficult in that time, but there's a reason for that time of preparation. I can't even imagine what Esther went through. How her skin probably hurt. I don't know if you've ever had cracked skin and you put some kind of ointments on there at times. It burns. It hurts. Put a little bit of lip gloss on. If you got cracked lips, it burns. So you can imagine what Esther went through. It was very uncomfortable while she was in the preparation stage. And I'm here to share with you, the preparation stage is really, really difficult. And again, as I share this with you, Esther had no idea. She was one of multiple ladies who could have been selected. She could have gone through all this for nothing while she waited. Verse 13, it says, "And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name." So again, she's waiting. She goes before the king and says basically, "Look at me, how beautiful I am," whatever. And she had no idea whether the king was going to bring her back or not. And isn't that true in the season of waiting? Isn't it that true in that season that we're just waiting? We're not sure whether it's going to work out. You apply for a job. You know, a lot of times people want a new job, and you apply for that job, and you have no idea whether you're going to be selected or not. Because you're waiting on someone else and their response. That's exactly what she went through in this passage. In verse 15, when the turn came for Esther, the young woman Mordecai had adopted and the daughter of his uncle Abihail, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month of Tebeth, in the 7th month of the year of his reign. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her king instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberty. So here, all of a sudden, she's selected. She had no idea. We also don't know in this story whether she was actually knew in her mind that she was going to be selected or not. But, here's the other thing that I want to share with you about this part of the story. Yes, she was selected to be the queen among all the other ladies, but what she didn't know that her story wasn't done. Sometimes when our season of life changes and things happen, God wasn't done with her. That's not the sole reason she was selected to be the queen. We're going to talk about that over the next couple weeks. But that wasn't the sole reason. We think when we're through that season of change, that's it. There's more to the story. There's always more to the story. When I graduated college, I didn't want anything else to do with education. But there was more to the story. God wanted me to go to seminary. When I went to seminary, I thought I was done with learning. I have gone through so many seminars, classes, and different things over the years, but it's helped me get where I am today. God wasn't completely done with Esther. So I want to share with you just a few thoughts. But just based on my reflection of the story of Esther waiting that year, I am certain that it was rather lonely while she waited. Not only did she not have her family there, not only did she probably not know any of the other people, because again, she wasn't a part of this culture. So she wouldn't have gone to school with any of the other ladies or known any of the other people. It probably was pretty lonely. And I can tell you this, sometimes when you're in that season of waiting, it can be rather lonely. It can be rather difficult because nobody understands what you're going through while you wait. So I'm pretty sure it was probably rather lonely. And she didn't even have the luxury of a cell phone to text message anybody. She couldn't FaceTime, whatever. She was just there. Nothing from the outside. Again, because they wanted to make sure that she wasn't exposed to any of the diseases of that time. She would have received treatments for her skin, and I'm sure it would have been painful and discomfort, a lot of discomfort. And I'm going to tell you, in those seasons of change, when we're waiting for change to happen, it can be very uncomfortable. It can be very difficult. Brittany preached a couple of weeks ago about one of my favorite verses in the book of John. It says, in this life, you will have trouble. And what I can tell you is in those seasons of preparation of change, you might have difficulty. It might be difficult. I don't know about you, but a lot of times as I'm waiting on those seasons of change, it can be very, very difficult. I am sure, as she had treatments every day for a year, it probably seemed silly. But the thing is we need to realize that while we're waiting, God is not done working. He's working on bringing everything together, but He's also working on us. One of the greatest things that may change during your season of waiting may, in fact, be you. One of the things that may change in our season while we wait, God may be wanting to change you, work on you to get you where He needs you to be. It may seem silly, but He may have some transformation that He wants to do. The final thing I want to share with you today in this message is this. What kept Esther going? Through all the pain, through all the waiting, through all the discomfort, what kept her going? And I think it was two things. Number one, she had somebody encouraging her. Mordecai, her uncle, would stop by from time to time and encourage her. And I'm going to tell you, if you know a friend who's in the season of waiting in their life, be an encourager. Be there for people. Sometimes I get so busy that I don't do a good job of encouraging people. But if you know someone is waiting on a season of change, it's pretty easy. Pick up the phone, dial the number, call them and just say, hey, how you doing? I'm here for you, or I'm praying for you. Send them a card. I believe today's world, we've almost lost the personal touch with text messages and Facebook messages and whatever. Folks, I send out birthday cards hopefully every week to people in the church. I try. If I missed you, I'm sorry. But I can't tell you the number of people who say to me, thank you for that handwritten card. Still makes a difference. So my point is if you know someone's waiting on a season of change, don't forget about them. Mordecai didn't forget about his cousin. He kept going and trying to encourage her. Be an encourager to someone. And then the second thing I'll share with you that I think she obviously had some hope of a change. I've said this 1,000 times standing in this pulpit. The one thing you and I cannot live without is change. There's one thing that you and I cannot live without, hope. That we can't live without hope. So I guarantee you Esther had some hope. Maybe she didn't know that she was going to be the queen, but she had to have kept going. What kept her going was the hope of a better tomorrow. That's what will keep us going. When we're waiting in those seasons of change, when we're waiting for things to change and we're waiting for that season of change to finally come, We can't give up hope. And it's easy to do. I love this verse. It comes from Psalm 27:14. This is a hard verse. Psalm 27:14. It's not on the screen, but it's something we all need to remember. Wait on the Lord. It's 4 words. Do you remember what I just said? Wait on the Lord. Say it with me. Wait on the Lord. That's hard. Be of good courage, and He will strengthen your heart while you wait. Wait on the Lord. We sang 2 songs, Victory in Jesus and Great is Thy Faithfulness. I'm going to tell you, the only thing that I regret more in life is not waiting on God, trying to do it on my own, trying to force things to happen. How many times in our life do we want something to change and we try to force it? A door will not open easily until it's God's timing. We can try to force it. You know, Esther could have been like, okay, I'm going to try to do this early so I can get out of this, kick the door down, and go through it. But she wasn't ready. There was a lot of preparation that needed to happen. So we need to learn to wait on the Lord. Because one of the things I regret more in my life than anything, is not waiting on God. Because God is in control of everything. God is sovereign. Because it's better to wait on the Lord than to chase after fruitless, futile things. Because there's a lot of things I've wanted in my life that God didn't give me, and I'm glad He didn't. Because in the end, He had a better plan. Same thing for Esther. She had to spend a year in preparation. And before we can get through the seasons of our life, God may be preparing us. That's why we have winter. I started in this conversation talking about seasons. There's a purpose for winter. Some things have to die so they can live again. There's a purpose for winter. So there's a purpose while in our seasons while we wait. Will you bow your heads with me? Father, it's hard in that season when we long, we want something. We want it to be over. We want the pain to be over. We want the experience to be over. We want to move on to new and better things. We just want it to be done. We want that new thing. And so it's hard to wait. God, I am so guilty of not waiting on you. Trying to force things, trying to make it happen quicker. And it only happens in the right way and the right time when we trust in you, when we wait on you. Thank you for the story of Esther. Thank you for helping us to learn something from her story. God, Esther had all the things against her that would have made her not the right fit to be the queen, but you had something different in mind. You were the one that brought about the story because you have a plan for her. And I think you have a plan for all of us. I ask you to be in our midst. Lord, if there's somebody here today that wants to just come down and pray, maybe they're struggling waiting on you to bring things about. I'd love to pray with them. I ask you to be in our midst today, Father. If there's somebody who wants to pray, somebody who wants to talk to me, Lord, I'd love to talk to them. Just ask you to be in this time. In Jesus' name, amen.